Right now, across the US, there are Harley dealers staring at inventory sheets that are bleeding red on 7 bikes. The factory's pushing them hard. The floor plan interest is ticking, and every new walk-in is another chance to dump those bikes on someone who doesn't know any better. In this video, we are exposing the 7 Harley-Davidson bikes dealers are begging you to buy, how they're being sold as can't-miss deals, and what that really means for your comfort, your money, and your long-term satisfaction. Number 7, Harley-Davidson Sportster 48. You can spot the kind of rider who falls for a peanut tank from a block away. He is drawn to that low, slammed stance and thick front tire the way some riders are drawn to chrome. The Sportster 48 speaks to that instinct, to the memory of stripped iron parked outside corner bars and small-town garages. It looks like a sketch from a younger version of yourself, back when comfort and practicality came second to attitude. That is exactly why so many of these bikes are still sitting under showroom lights, waiting for someone willing to live with the trade-offs. The visual punch is still strong. Short fenders, solo seat, big front rubber, and that tiny tank create a silhouette that feels honest and old school. You do not need a spec sheet to know it was built to look tough first and ride second. The issue is that a lot of riders today have already paid their dues. Bad backs, long miles, and rising prices make a small tank and a stiff seat feel less romantic and more like work. That tension between the heart and the spine is exactly where the Sportster 48 lives. Many older riders who walk into a showroom already own a touring rig or a big twin. For them, the Sportster 48 becomes a second bike fantasy, a bar hopper, or a Sunday loop machine. Yet they also remember holding throttle for 8 or 10 hours across states, and they know exactly how a short-range machine changes the ride. Stopping every hour for fuel is charming in your 20s, but with a long history of real trips under your belt, it starts to feel like a sacrifice of time and momentum. There is also the question of value. Earlier generations of the Sportster line were known as working man bikes. You could pick one up used, wrench on it yourself, and get into the brand without needing to sign away years of payments. Today, the Sportster 48 still carries that stripped image, yet the price has climbed into territory where riders start comparing it to bigger, more capable machines. When you have lived through several market cycles, you know exactly how that affects long-term satisfaction and resale. Hidden beneath the stripped bobber look, the 48 delivers roughly 60 horsepower from a 1202 cubic centimeter engine, pushes out about 73 pound-feet of torque, relies on a single front disc and single rear disc braking system with an available anti-lock braking system option, rides on a conventional telescopic front fork paired with twin preload adjustable rear shocks, carries a wet weight in the neighborhood of 553 pounds, keeps the saddle low at around 26.2 inches, and rolls out of the showroom with a starting price close to $12,300. Further down the list, a modern water-cooled twin tries to court the same rider in a very different way. Number 6, Harley-Davidson Nightster. Some motorcycles walk into a room quietly and still manage to split opinion. Riders circle them, arms crossed, trying to decide whether they are looking at the future or at something that forgot its own past. The Nightster is exactly that kind of machine. It carries a familiar name, yet under the skin it speaks a different language than the old air-cooled iron many riders grew up with. Dealers hoped that difference would pull in a new wave of younger owners. Instead, a lot of seasoned riders pause, think hard, and walk back toward the big twins they already understand. Part of that hesitation comes from memory. The word Nightster used to mean a lean, simple, air-cooled bruiser, carburetors or early fuel injection, not a menu of ride modes, steel and vibration, not a long list of electronic aids. Older riders, especially those who turned their own wrenches in gravel driveways, built a relationship with that version of the brand. When they see a low, tidy silhouette and a familiar badge wrapped around a water-cooled heart, something does not quite line up in their minds. The motorcycle may be capable, but the story feels out of tune. Spend a minute around the Nightster in a showroom, and you can see the engineering effort. The chassis is tighter and lighter than the old cradle frames. The tank-shaped cover hides an airbox, not fuel. The weight sits low. The controls feel modern, the clutch light, the brakes stronger than the last generation of small cruisers. On paper, it solves problems that riders have complained about for decades, from weak braking to vague handling. Yet many of the riders staring at it have already put hundreds of thousands of miles on older machines that never had those upgrades, and they wonder if the change came 30 years too late. Another piece of the puzzle is where the Nightster sits in the lineup. It is not cheap enough to be a true beginner bargain, especially when there are plenty of used twins with luggage and wind protection for similar money. It is not powerful enough to tempt a longtime sport rider away from a fast standard or a big sport tourer. It also lacks the visual mass and highway presence of a full dresser or a large bagger. That leaves it in a gray area, especially for a rider who has already moved past the need to prove anything at a stoplight. For riders eyeing something more modern without going full sport machine, the Nightster steps in with around 90 horsepower from a 975 cubic centimeter engine. Turns out roughly 70 pound-feet of torque. Uses dual front discs and a single rear disc supported by a standard anti-lock braking system. Moves on a conventional telescopic front fork matched with twin preload adjustable rear shocks. Tips the scales at about 480 pounds wet, sits its rider at roughly 27.8 inches off the ground, and generally starts at around $13,500. One step further into the list, a small air-cooled twin shows how a familiar design can still miss the mark for many long-time riders. If you value straight talk on real Harleys, take a second to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us your experience with these models in the comments so other riders can learn from your miles on the road. Number 5. Harley-Davidson Iron 883. Some machines attract new riders for all the wrong reasons. Low seat, low price, low intimidation factor. And suddenly, every dealer in the country is steering first-timers toward the same small air-cooled twin. The Iron 883 has been that default choice for years. It looks tough, sounds familiar, and wears the right badge on the tank. For someone who has never owned a motorcycle, that is often enough. For a rider with decades of miles behind him, those same qualities start to raise hard questions about comfort, value, and long-term satisfaction. Older riders remember when an entry-level machine was still expected to cover distance. You might start on something lighter, but it could still carry you across a few states with a duffel strapped to the back. The Iron 883 in stock trim feels built more for short hops than for long hauls. Compact ergonomics, a small tank, and limited suspension travel all push it towards city duty. Riders who came up on long-legged standards and early tourers know exactly how that plays out on rough highways and long, straight stretches of wind-beaten interstate. From the curb, the Iron 883 still pulls the eye. Blacked-out cases, minimal chrome, and that classic staggered exhaust give it the right stance. In photos, it looks every bit the pared-down street bruiser many riders dreamed about as teenagers. Step closer, throw a leg over, and the reality settles in. The foot pegs feel close. The bars a little narrow, the rear shocks short on travel. There is also the question of power. The Iron 883 is not slow in the context of older machines, but modern traffic is unforgiving. Merging, passing two long trucks on a two-lane, or carrying luggage and a passenger all expose the limits of a smaller displacement. Air-cooled, twin-tuned more for character than outright thrust. Riders who grew up with torquey big twins or strong Japanese fours notice immediately when the motor needs to be worked hard just to stay ahead of the flow. They know what real reserve feels like at 70 or 80 miles an hour, and they can tell when it is missing. From the perspective of pure entry into the brand, the Iron 883 keeps the numbers modest, with about 50 horsepower from its 883 cubic centimeter engine, sends roughly 51 pound-feet of torque to the rear wheel, stops through a single front disc and single rear disc braking system with an optional anti-lock braking system, rolls on a basic telescopic front fork with short twin rear shocks, carries a wet weight in the area of 560 pounds, offers a low seat height of around 25.7 inches, and usually carries a starting sticker close to $11,900. Moving higher on the list, a larger, more serious cruiser shows how added power and presence change the equation for older, touring-minded riders. Number 4. Harley-Davidson Lowrider S. Tia. Every so often, you see a bike that looks like it was built for the kind of rider who refuses to grow old quietly. The Lowrider Saint has that presence. Tall bars, frame-mounted fairing, hard bags tucked tight to the rear, and a stance that says it wants to charge hard through a mountain pass before settling into a long highway pull. It feels like a love letter to 80s performance customs, blended with modern power and braking. Dealers expected it to fly out the doors. Instead, Many of them are parked in a corner, admired often, purchased slowly. Walk around a Lowrider Saint, and it is hard not to appreciate the details. The fairing sits high enough to take the blast off your chest, while still leaving a clear view of the road. The mid-controls keep your feet under you, instead of stretched way out in front, which older riders who remember early superbikes tend to appreciate. The hard bags look purposeful rather than decorative, like they were meant for tools, rain gear, and a worn leather jacket more than lawn chairs and coolers. Everything about the bike says distance at speed, not casual posing. For a rider who came of age on big air-cooled 4s or early torque-rich twins, the way the Lowrider Saint makes power feels familiar and satisfying. It comes on thick in the middle, right where you live on a 2-lane back road, or rolling through a series of sweepers. Roll on in 3rd or 4th gear, and the bike pulls with authority. It feels alive, eager to climb grades without drama. That kind of character matters when you have spent years measuring engines not by spec sheets, but by how they respond when you are tired, loaded, and far from home. Comfort, though, sits at an interesting crossroads. The fairing and mid-controls offer support that many stripped cruisers simply cannot match. At the same time, the stock saddle and suspension tuning lean more toward a firm, sport touring feel than a plush touring couch. For younger riders, that can be a plus. For riders looking for comfort, the sharper edge in the ride can grow old over a long day. Many will look at the Lowrider Saint, appreciate the intent, and still find themselves gravitating back toward full dressers with wide seats and tall, calm windshields. When the conversation shifts toward middleweight mile eaters with attitude, the Lowrider Saint answers with roughly 103 horsepower from a 1923 cubic centimeter engine, backs that up with about 125 pound-feet of torque, sheds speed through dual front discs with 4-piston calipers and a single rear disc tied into a standard anti-lock braking system, rides on an inverted front fork working with a single external reservoir. Rear shock comes in at a wet weight of roughly 721 pounds, places the rider at a seat height near 27 inches, and starts its pricing around $22,200. Stepping further into the list, a serious bagger shows how full fairings and big touring frames shape the way riders judge power and comfort. Number 3. Harley-Davidson Sportster S. Every rider remembers the first time a familiar nameplate looked completely different. You walk across the showroom floor, see the badge, and your brain expects a certain shape, a certain stance, a certain sound. Then your eyes land on something lower, thicker, almost cartoon, strong, with a fat front tire and a radiator hanging in the wind. That moment sums up the Sportster S for a lot of older riders. The name carries 50 years of garage stories, yet the machine in front of you feels more like a stripped muscle bike than the simple, honest twin you remember kicking to life decades ago. There is no denying the intent. The Sportster S is built to shock anyone who still thinks smaller Harley twins are slow or soft. Low-slung pipes, short tail, wide rubber, and a big modern engine packed into a tight wheelbase give it a stance closer to a custom drag bike than a traditional bar hopper. To a younger rider used to naked sport machines, that is a welcome shift. To a man who grew up with peanut tanks and skinny front wheels, it feels like the name has been bolted onto a very different species. Spend a little time on the saddle, and the story grows more complicated. The Sportster S leaps forward with the kind of urgency that older air-cooled twins simply never had. Where the older bikes would thump and build, this engine snaps to attention, revs quickly, and pulls hard through the middle. Twist the throttle in 2nd or 3rd, and the bike charges ahead in a way that feels more like a European street fighter than the relaxed, rolling surge many cruiser riders expect. For some, that is thrilling. For others, it feels out of step with the slow, heavy rhythm they fell in love with decades ago. Comfort is where a lot of seasoned riders start to hesitate. The Sportster S sits low, with forward controls and a fairly compact cockpit. For a short blast around town or a quick rip along a back road, the position works. Stretch that out into a 6 or 8 hour day with crosswinds and rough pavement, and you begin to notice how much weight is on your tailbone and lower back. Riders who have spent years behind wide bars and on broad seats know just how punishing that can be, especially when the suspension is set more for sharp handling than for swallowing broken highway. For outright punch in a compact package, the Sportster S steps forward with approximately 121 horsepower from a 1252 cubic centimeter engine, lays down about 94 pound-feet of torque. relies on dual front discs with 4 piston calipers and a single rear disc integrated into a cornering sensitive anti-lock braking system. Tracks on an inverted front fork paired with a single piggyback rear shock. Posts a wet weight around 502 pounds. Sets the seat at roughly 30.6 inches and enters the showroom floor at a starting price near $16,400. Closer to the top of the list, a larger faired machine shows how far dealers will go to move heavyweight iron that promises true highway comfort. If you have made it this far, you are the kind of rider we make these breakdowns for. So tap subscribe and ride along with every new deep dive into the bikes that still matter on American roads to today. Number 2, Harley-Davidson Road Glide ST. Every dealer has at least one machine sitting under the lights that feels like a statement piece. Big money, big motor, big presence. The Road Glide ST is that kind of motorcycle. You see it from across the showroom floor, all sharp lines and frame-mounted fairing, and you know it was not built for beginners. It was built for riders who have already logged the miles, already done the hard trips, and want a bagger that hits harder than the old touring rigs. Yet those same riders are often the ones who hesitate longest before signing on the line. Men who have run coast to coast on earlier touring machines know what really matters at the end of a long day. Wind protection, saddle comfort, slow speed stability, and the way the motor feels after 8 hours under load. The Road glides and promises more power and sharper manners than the classic big touring bikes, but it also comes with a firmer ride, taller performance image, and a price tag that pushes the limits of what many retired or semi-retired riders are willing to accept. Pride meets practicality, and the decision gets complicated. Walk around a Road Glide Saint and the details broadcast purpose. The frame-mounted shark nose fairing cuts a clean path through the air, steady in crosswinds in a way bar-mounted fairings can never quite match. Saddlebags sit tight and high, more aggressive than the full depth bags on standard tours. Blacked out parts and performance touches speak to the mind of a rider who likes to move a little faster than traffic without drawing too much attention. It is a serious machine, tailored toward people who know exactly what they are looking at. Seat time tells a similar story. The Road Glide Saint pulls hard, settles into a confident lope at highway speeds, and shrugs off long grades with a twist of the throttle. For someone who came up riding carbureted big twins or even earlier shovelhead and evolution tourers, the strength of the modern engine can be a pleasant shock. At the same time, the firmer suspension and tighter ergonomics remind you that this is meant to be a performance bagger, not a pure plush couch on wheels. Riders who want to stack 10 or 12-hour days back to back will feel that trade-off in their hips and lower back. Looking at heavyweight baggers tuned for performance, the Road Glide Saint brings roughly 106 horsepower from a 1923 cubic centimeter engine, twists out about 127 pound-feet of torque, stops with dual front discs using 4 piston calipers and a single rear disc tied into a standard anti-lock braking system, rides on a dual bending valve front fork matched with manually adjustable rear shocks, carries a substantial wet weight of around 842 pounds, keeps the seat height close to 26.7 inches, and generally starts with a price tag in the area of $30,000. At the very top of the list, an unlikely adventure machine shows how far the brand has wandered from its old comfort zone, while dealers work hard to move them. Number 1, Harley-Davidson Pan America Special. Every brand reaches a moment where it has to decide what it really is. For a company built on chrome, air cooling, and long shadows across American highways, stepping into the tall, high-tech adventure class was a bold move. The Pan America Special is that step, standing on showroom floors, among road glides and ultras like a visitor from another world. Spoked wheels, tall suspension, skid plates, and a radiator announce that this machine is not meant for polished parking lots alone. Older riders stop, stare, and try to decide whether they are looking at betrayal or evolution. Many riders who came up on rigid frames, early touring rigs, or big Japanese standards understand the pull of real capability. Long travel suspension and serious ground clearance are not just for show when you find broken pavement, gravel stretches, or washed out shoulders. In that sense, the Pan America Special speaks to the same spirit that once sent riders down dirt roads on machines never meant for it. The difference is that this time the bike is actually built for the job, packed with more engineering than most cruisers have ever seen. That engineering can be a double-edged sword. The Pan America Special carries ride modes, traction systems, cornering aids, semi-active suspension, and a large display full of information. Some experienced riders welcome those tools, having ridden enough miles in rain, crosswinds, and surprise cold snaps to appreciate any edge they can get. Others see layers of menus and electronics that separate them from the simple, honest connection they value. They remember setting sag with tools, not through a screen. For riders considering a tall, go-anywhere machine, the Pan America Special comes armed with roughly 150 horsepower from a 1,252 cubic centimeter engine, offers about 94 pound-feet of torque, uses dual front discs with radial-mounted 4-piston calipers, and a single rear disc backed by a cornering-sensitive anti-lock braking system, glides on electronically controlled semi-active front and rear suspension, posts a wet weight near 569 pounds, provides an adjustable seat height that ranges from about 31.1 inches to 33.1 inches, and enters the catalog with a starting price around $20,000. From there, the real question is whether riders treat it as a side story or as the first chapter of a new era. The bikes we ride say a lot about us, but the ones dealers can't sell say even more about the market. If this opened your eyes to what's really going on behind those showroom doors, hit like and subscribe so you're riding with us on the next breakdown. And don't leave without commenting, which Harley did. They push hardest on you, and what did you end up choosing? Instead,